Hey, it's me, Lars Larson. Thanks for checking out my podcast, and be sure to tell a friend about the Lars Larson Show.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, the corruption of the Joe Biden White House absolutely knows no bounds. Did Joe Biden abuse his executive powers to demand that the DOJ remove the entire IRS investigative team into Hunter Biden? I want to dig into that in just a moment. But first, welcome to the Lars Larson Show on a Tuesday. Glad to have you with me, and always glad to take your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, you disagree with my point of view, why, you're more than welcome. We'll put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com, and you can vote in our Twitter poll as well. This one's shocking. I mean, I see a lot of crazy stuff every single day, but the idea that I'd have to ask you a crazy question like this: should unvetted illegal aliens, many of whom are adult males, be housed inside of American public elementary schools? And yes, you heard me right. That's what's happening. It's happening right now in New York City. They have 6 public elementary schools in New York City. They're going to take their gymnasiums and they're going to house illegal aliens who have flooded into New York City. Now, New York's a blue city in a blue state. I mean, they vote reliably for Democrats all day long. So why would they object? Why, you wanted all these illegal aliens in the country, and then you assumed that they'd just be soaked up by a bunch of those southern states, like Florida, so you could turn that one blue as well, or maybe Texas, turn that one blue, and just add to the illegal alien population that is financially crushing one of the most successful and lucrative and, frankly, positive states, the state of California. I don't live there. I lived there when I was a little kid, but it's a great state on paper until you flood it with illegal aliens, many of whom are dependent on government services. And then you've got a state that's routinely running a multi-billion-dollar deficit in its budget. But imagine if you were one of the parents in New York City. For example, Damaris Fernandez, who is a parent of students at 2 New York public schools, MS 577 and PS 17. He says this is a crazy security issue. He says when parents go to the school on legitimate business to provide for their kids, to see their kids, to pick them up early or drop them off late, whatever it is they need to do, the parents must sign in and provide ID before they're allowed to go into the school. And he says now there are migrants in the playground. I'm sorry that Fernandez is using the politically popular term migrants. They are, in fact, illegal aliens. An alien is a foreign national. If you have illegally entered America, you become an illegal alien because there are, of course, legal aliens, visitors to this country, people who hold green cards and all the rest. These are illegal aliens, and we don't even know who they are. What we do know is that Customs and Border Protection has encountered so many people who are coming across our now wide open border, thank you, Joe Biden, and they're coming across, and many of them have criminal records. And lately, all those pictures you saw months and months ago of tiny little families with a mommy and a daddy and a couple of cute little kids. Unfortunately, we found out that in some cases it wasn't their kids. They were just trafficking the kids across the border and being able to reduce the cost of the coyote that guided them into the United States. These days, the videos you're seeing from America's southern border as the invasion continues at thousands of people every day. And then you see people like Secretary Mayorkas, the Homeland Security guy for Joe Biden, and Joe Biden saying, well, we've got the numbers down from 10,000 to 6,000 or 6,000 to 4,000. I'll just remind you of what the soundbite I played for you last night. Jay Johnson, who was Homeland Security Secretary to Barack Obama, he said, anything under 1,000, not a bad day at the border. If you have less than 1,000 people a day crossing, he said anything over 1,000 is a crisis. And Joe Biden is congratulating himself, and so is Mayorkas, saying, well, we got the number down from 10,000 or 10 times a crisis to only 6,000 or 4,000. So in other words, Joe Biden is presiding over something that the Obama administration, which he was part of, would only have considered a 4 times crisis. But The question is, should unvetted illegals, many of them adult males, be housed within America's public elementary schools? I would say no to that. I understand we'll probably get a few real hardcore liberals who will vote yes. You can find the question at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group. You should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Now, coming up later on this hour, and then I'll get to the abuse that Joe Biden is doing at the IRS. Was China as big a threat during the Reagan administration and the Cold War as it is now? And if so, how can we deal with them in a similar fashion to the way Reagan dealt with the old Soviet Union? Liberals seem to think that voting by mail is fine for presidential elections and all that, but not for union elections? How are they setting a brand new double standard without which Democrats would have no standards at all? Will Joe Biden be raising America's already massive debt ceiling at the cost of raising taxes? Joe wants what he calls a clean debt ceiling increase. It ain't clean at all. It's dirty as all get out. And take a moment, if you have a moment, to cast a vote in our Twitter poll. You'll find it at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. You can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Truth Social for sure. But let me tell you about this. As National Review points out, the IRS has removed the entire investigative team that was in charge of overseeing a criminal investigation into Hunter Biden 1 month after a whistleblower came to Congress to allege the investigation was being mishandled. So in other words, the president's son is being investigated by the IRS. And many of the leads in that investigation lead right back to the big guy, Joe Biden. And now the entire investigative team has been removed at an agency that is an executive branch agency. That means Joe Biden calls the shots for the IRS. The Justice Department reportedly ordered the team's removal, according to the New York Post. Now the whistleblower's attorneys claim the team's removal is in retaliation for his decision to come forward and say they are screwing up this investigation of the president's son, and you and I both know why they're doing it. Same reason that the Secret Service is refusing to hand over emails that identify visitors to President Biden's homes, multiple homes, in Delaware. And why is that? They're trying to hide who Joe Biden is talking to. They know that Joe Biden has major problems. Joe Biden is now using the United States government and his power as president to protect himself and the Biden crime family. Republicans need to suggest this is going to lead to impeachment. Republicans need to grow a backbone and the other parts of their anatomy that they need to impeach Mayorkas and Biden and a bunch of other people. Coming up, we got to talk about China as a big threat today. And could we deal with China the way the great President Ronald Reagan dealt with the Soviet Union? We'll talk about that coming up next on the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, China is our biggest competitor on planet Earth. It's a major danger to the United States, both militarily, economically, intellectual property-wise, and everything else. Frank Gaffney knows that better than most. He is the founder of the Center for Security Policy and author of the new #1 best-selling book on Amazon, The Indictment, prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and friends for crimes against America, China, and the world. Frank, welcome back.
Well, Lars, thank you. And I just want to make clear, it's #1 in a couple of categories. It has been the past couple of days. So it's not the #1 overall, but we're very proud that the public is responding to it as it is. And we're delighted to have a chance to talk with you about it.
I'm sure there's some fiction books that outdo it. Usually people like fiction, although these days the stuff that you write is nonfiction. Sounds almost like science fiction, like could you imagine that our world would end up like this? But let me ask you, one of the big regrets in my career is that after a long time as a reporter, I never once got the chance to interview Ronald Reagan or even to meet the man, although I admired him from a distance. But he mapped out, as you point out, quite a strategy for taking down the evil empire, the Soviet Union, and it worked, despite all the predictions of the contrary. Should we take a similar approach to China if we have the right leadership in the White House?
I don't think it's just a matter of whether we should or not. I think we absolutely have to. if our country is to survive, Lars. I had the privilege of working for President Reagan, as you know, and even before then, to really be imprinted as a young man with what was done by a group called the Committee on the Present Danger, which he was a member of, by the way. And he asked to help him devise a strategy for taking down the Soviet Union. And they did. And he embraced it, made it part of his platform for 1980, his run for the presidency that year. And the American people gave him the mandate he sought to effect a major course correction in the way we were conducting ourselves vis-a-vis that time's existential threat to freedom, as he called it. I think we need to be doing very much the same thing now. The trouble is that in the interval, the Chinese Communist Party has taken advantage of our, attention elsewhere or inattention generally to do a couple of things. They call it, as you know, Lars, unrestricted warfare against us. And this isn't a matter of conjecture or trying to figure out, what kind of doctrine. In 1999, two senior colonels of the Chinese Communist Party's military, the People's Liberation Army, wrote a book entitled Unrestricted Warfare, and it said this is how we're going to destroy the United States, basically without resorting to military power, because at that time they couldn't compete with us in that regard. They created the conditions that exist today, particularly, Lars, and we document this in the book in 9 different charges, 8 of them related to this phenomenon of unrestricted warfare. The most insidious of all, I believe, is the one that involves the capture of American elites. Joe Biden, of course, is the poster child of this syndrome, but unfortunately, they've used the same techniques that they have to capture him and his family over many years now, to capture the financial sector leaders, business leaders in various parts of the tech space, and notably industrial base and so on. The media, you know this very well, of course, present company accepted.
Oh,
surely.
no,
But
I've never taken a dime from them. And believe me, I, in some ways, feel very sorry for the people in journalism who did take money that way, because it means that they're compromised. I've managed to stay blissfully clear of it.
Yeah, and well, to your credit. But it also has been true in academia and in Hollywood and elsewhere. The point being that when the people that we have been encouraged to believe are smarter than we are and better equipped to make decisions for all of us, and in some cases we elect to represent us and make decisions that are directly vital to our personal and physical and societal security, and they don't tell us what's going on here because they're working for the other team, that is a mortal peril to our country. And so flashing back to Ronald Reagan, I think that one of the things that he would certainly insist upon is, removing such people from positions of power and influence as job one. We need to be about that.
Well, how about Joe Biden to start with? And I'll tell you, Frank, I've been saying that for a while. I think he has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. But consider what just happened today, and it's a small piece of the bigger picture. You've got Joe Biden saying our future is solar panels and electric cars and electric everything else and windmills. And almost all of that comes from China, or the components come from China. So a bipartisan group in Congress passed a bill. Now, so it's both supported by Republicans and Democrats saying, hey, you've got to give some protection to the U.S. solar panel industry. And I'm not a big fan of protectionism, but in this case, when you look at China and you say they're getting the minerals, they have access to it, and they're not tied down by the EPA. They've got the energy to do it because they've got coal-fired electric plants and nuclear plants. And they've got the inexpensive labor, less expensive than America, and less expensive regulations of all kinds. There's no way you can compete against that manufacturing the same things here. It will either be very difficult or it'll be well nigh impossible. So the Congress says, okay, let's provide some protection. Bipartisan bill. What does Joe Biden do with it today? He vetoes the bill, a bill voted on by some of his own Democrats, saying we got to provide some protection or America is never going to have a solar panel industry. It'll always be underpriced by China and Malaysia and other countries. And Joe said no. He doesn't want his Chinese friends to have competition in America.
Lars, you and I talk about this most weeks. I believe that the policies that he has pursued since he came to the White House have been characterized without exception by two things. One, they're bad for America, and two, they benefit the Chinese Communist Party. There is hardly a more egregious example of it than the one you've just talked about. The fifth charge in our indictment is about the energy war that China's been waging against us with help from their friends, taking us down by reducing us from what Donald Trump was striving for, which was energy dominance, and what he basically had delivered, energy independence, and getting us down to the point where we are dependent on our mortal enemy. And the idea that we might even compete in the future with them is, as far as he's concerned, unacceptable. That tells you all you need to know. This guy is batting for the other team. And what I'm warning of in this book, The Indictment, Lars, is I fear, and this is, by the way, informed by 70 different webinars we've done over the past 11 months or so at presentdangerchina.org. They're available for free. In fact, you can get them if you care to. In the book, you can see a QR code that'll give you the direct access to the videos. But the point is, the consensus judgment of our team, not just mine, but our team, is that Joe Biden is completely unfit to serve in the event we find ourselves in a shooting war, which seems to be a distinct possibility, if not a probability, to be the commander-in-chief of the United States military. It's unimaginable, and it has to be rectified now before that happens. I think, frankly, if we were to remedy it, it may make such an attack, such a war with China, not just against Taiwan, by the way, but against our friends and allies out there in the Pacific, yes, but also against our assets, our personnel, and our territory as well.
Well, my fear, Frank, is that the Republicans, even the House, where they have a majority, don't have the guts to do it. And they've always got an excuse. Well, it'll appear to be political. The founders of this country knew that impeachment would be political. They understood it. They wrote it into the system long before the Democrat and Republican parties ever came to life. So you've got a process that's inherently political, and what you need to do is make the case. If our current commander-in-chief is compromised, if he's making decisions that are demonstrably damaging to the United States, like this one, as I said, it's just one piece of it. When you say, oh, no, I'm going to let my Chinese buddies, many of whom may have put money right in the Biden crime family pocket by giving it to Hunter and having it filter through to Joe, and then Joe gets the IRS to fire the investigative team looking at Hunter Biden, and he vetoes a bill that would have protected an American industry competing with China. I think it's very, very clear what's going on. That's Frank Gaffney. The book is called The Indictment, and you've got The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I want you to consider this question. Is vote by mail safe, or is vote by mail a wide open opportunity for fraud in elections? I actually believe the latter rather than the former. I don't think vote by mail is very good. And depending on where you're living, you may have had your first taste of vote by mail in the last couple of years. There were a lot of elected officials who used the pandemic as an excuse to force vote by mail on people. And by that, I mean, there were states where they literally ignored their own state laws and sent out absentee ballots to people who had never requested them. Wisconsin comes to mind, for example, because the Democrats have decided that vote by mail is a great opportunity to cheat, to engage in what's called ballot harvesting, which is where, to use a common example, you find a nursing home or several nursing homes or a few hundred nursing homes, and then you go there and you have young volunteers, Democrats and liberals, who go to those nursing homes and say, we're going to help these older people to vote. And by help to vote, they mean they get a chance to guide them in their voting. And let me remind you of something. For decades, while I was a voter in a non-vote by mail state that became a vote by mail state, one of the first, it was illegal for you to go to a polling place and talk about politics or encourage anybody to vote in a particular way. You couldn't today, in a state like that, have worn a Trump T-shirt inside a polling place when you were going to vote in person. And if you went into a polling place and someone said, hey, by the way, I need some help filling out my ballot. Lars, would you mind stepping in here and help show me how to do it? I'd be breaking the law if I did that. You couldn't politic within 100 feet of most polling places. And yet today, when the polling place is your kitchen table, or maybe the table in your nursing home or assisted living facility, and you have a bunch of young volunteers who come in and say, why, Grandma, we'll help you fill out that ballot. And when she says, I'm not sure who to vote for president, you know who they say? They say, Joe Biden. He's that guy. You should vote for him. And it's not illegal at all. Well, with that as background, that I don't trust vote by mail, I've been living for about the last 20 years in states, Oregon and Washington, that have had vote by mail. I've seen how it operates. I see the opportunities for fraud. I see the opportunities for people to cheat in elections, as I believe happened in the 2020 November election. And then you have this. You have Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, who loves the idea of vote by mail. But he just signed a bill, Assembly Bill 113. I don't live in California, thank God. It's a great state, except it's got lousy leadership. But he signed this bill to make voting by mail illegal. Oh, not for general elections, not for choosing presidents and senators and members of Congress and members of your city council, county commission, or state legislature. No, Gavin Newsom says you can vote by mail for all those much more important offices, but if it comes to a farm worker union election, Assembly Bill 113, under a deal that Gavin Newsom did with the unions last year, made vote by mail in union elections illegal. He just signed the bill. He did it Monday, did it yesterday. Now, Newsom, as is pointed out by our friends at Breitbart.com, originally, Newsom sounded almost like Donald Trump as he objected to the vulnerability of vote by mail to fraud. He vetoed a bill last year to allow vote by mail in union elections because he said he couldn't support, and here's the key quote, he couldn't support an untested mail election process that lacks critical protections to protect the integrity of the election. And this is a union election. Okay, farm workers led a series of protests, including a march to the infamous French Laundry restaurant. That's the place where Newsom went with a bunch of lobbyists to eat dinner during the pandemic when there were all kinds of restrictions on going out to places like that. He finally signed a bill allowing vote by mail and other provisions under the understanding that the vote by mail provision would be repealed the following year. He's now made vote by mail in union elections illegal because he says it's not trustworthy, but he says you should trust it implicitly as you're choosing a president next fall or members of the Senate to replace the likes of Feinstein and Pelosi. Does that make any sense to anybody? And if it does, I'd be glad to take the naysayer call at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com and vote in our Twitter poll. And if you happen to be a naysayer, 866-439-5277. You go right to the head of the line. Let me tell you the other problem with this. And I always disclose to you if I have a bias in a particular subject. I don't like labor unions for me. Okay? I don't want to be a member of a labor union. I don't want to sponsor a labor union. I really don't want to be involved with labor unions at all. And as an American citizen, I should have that choice. If you choose to be involved in a labor union, I endorse that choice. I think you have the right to do it. I think you gain that right constitutionally because you have the right under the First Amendment, not only of free speech and freedom of religion, you have the right of freedom of association, meaning you can decide to get together with a group of people. Doesn't matter what your beliefs are. You can associate to bargain a contract. You can associate to be the NRA. You can associate to be the Sierra Club or the very corrupt ACLU, whatever you want to do. But let me tell you this about the unions. Part of this colors my experience because as a young guy in radio, I walked into a job once and I was there for a few days. And this guy big guy walks up to me in a radio station and he says, "You'll be joining the union." And I said, "I really don't want to join the union." He said, "Well, you will be joining the union." I said, and he was kind of obnoxious about it, as some union people are, not all. And I said, why will I be joining the union? He said, because our contract says we weren't a right to work state. Our contract says if you don't join the labor union that represents the radio reporters and anchors here, then the company is required to fire you. Well, as you can guess, I joined the labor union. And later on, I joined the effort to decertify that union, and we did away with that bargaining unit altogether. And that was only because a majority of workers agreed with it. Let me tell you what the danger in vote by mail for union elections is. The reason he wanted to make these illegal for California is that there is a relatively new thing called card check. And here's how card check works, and here's how card check is manipulated by the unions. A union organizer comes into a workplace and he says, hey, would you like to have a union? And if somebody says, no, I really don't think we need a union, like most Americans do, about 94% of private sector workers say, no, I don't need a union. So they'll say, well, would you at least like to have a vote on whether or not to form a union? They say, yeah, we can have a vote on it. If my fellow workers want it, fine, but I don't want it. You sign the card. When they get to 51%, the union is imposed on all workers. And when the workers say, hey, what about the election? They say, oh, we'll have elections, but there's a union right now, and you're in it, and you will pay dues. That's why they don't want to have secret vote by mail. They want the union to know who's opposing the union, and you can guess how you're going to be treated after that. By the way, are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000? Employee retention credits are an incredible opportunity for you. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. They've already helped out 1,500 small business owners get about $300 million, and they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these tax credits, and they'll be with you every step of the way, even in the event of an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, even if you already got the PPP, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant, it's not a loan, it's a tax refund. No upfront fees either to find out if you qualify. Go with a team you can trust at Get My Funds, 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I have to say, the D.C. police chief in that Get Back, he's not there anymore. The FBI hired him away, so I'm sure he's being indoctrinated over at the FBI. I want to ask you about something. Democrats love nothing more than spending your money and raising taxes as much as they can. So, well, what about the debt ceiling and the current negotiations to try to bring about some resolution that avoids America defaulting for the first time, full-on defaulting on its debt? Grover Norquist joins me now, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Welcome, Grover. And I said it that way because I guess technically there have been 4 other instances where America has defaulted on its debt. Although, as I understand it, those were highly technical. This might be a full-on default on our debt payments. Is that right?
It could, if we wait long enough. President spent 90 days deciding he wasn't going to meet with anybody. He wasn't going to talk to the Republicans. He was just demanding that they do what he wanted to do. And he didn't think that the Republican House, with only a 5-vote margin, would actually be able to vote through and put a budget and a debt ceiling increase in front of him. And that was his plan, to wait. And then the Senate, of course, the Democrats control the Senate. You can't pass something without their support. So what he would do is say that the House doesn't have one. The Senate could get a majority for something that he wants, and then say, see, we're really, if the House would just get 5 Republicans to vote with the Democrats, we can make no reforms at all and keep spending the way we like to. But he was put in a very difficult position when, one, McCarthy got all there's sort of 5 different caucuses inside the Republican Party, and they all had to come to an agreement. It was a very good, $4 trillion in spending restraint for $1.5 trillion debt ceiling increase, a lot of reforms. And then the Senate said 43 of them. Mitch McConnell said, you know what, I got 43 signatures here. That's 2 more than the 41 I need to stop any piece of legislation with a filibuster. So you have to pay attention to me as well as to McCarthy in the House, and the letter with the 43 signatures says we agree with McCarthy. We have to have serious reforms. So back to you. And so now he's, starting to say, well, we could do some reform of the permitting. You could do. They're taking some cash and they say we could get rid of it. All that money where they were supposed to spend it like 2-3 years ago because it was an emergency.
Yep.
And because it was an emergency, and still not spent yet. Still not spent. Some of it. So that sort of stuff could come back. So there's some real opportunity to make some progress. The president wants one very serious thing. He wants to not have to talk to Republicans for another year and a half. He does not want to have another debt ceiling increase. If you give him $1.5 trillion, which is what he wants, that only takes you about a year. Okay, so
it's gone.
It's gone, and you got to come back and do this again. So what would the challenge be? He would have to sit down with the Republicans again and do this 5-6 months before the next election. So he will pay through the nose in order to give us lots of goodies, just as Obama did. Obama gave us $2.4 trillion in reduced spending. Why? Because he didn't want to have to come back and do this again. So he wanted a larger debt ceiling increase to get you past the election. That is the one really big thing that Biden wants that almost nobody talks about.
Grover, are you there? Do you drop out on me? Grover? I'll put Grover on hold and see what happened. Grover, are you there? Sounds like we might have lost Grover's connection. So we'll have to see what happened there. Grover? No, it sounds like Grover went away. I got to tell you something. We may have lost Grover Norquist. We'll see if we can get him back on the line. Grover, of course, is the president for Americans for Tax Reform. Let me tell you one of the things that bothers me about all of this. He may have driven in. Grover, are you there? No, I think we may have lost his cell connection altogether. So one of the things that bothers me most about what is going on in this discussion is that when you make it clear what the Republicans want to do, it's really difficult for liberals. I would imagine even for some of our best naysayers, it would be very difficult for them to tell you why they don't want to do that. And let me give you an example. In Washington, D.C., and in the media, oftentimes you'll hear something like, well, we're having this discussion about the debt ceiling, and the Republicans want to make reforms. It's a shorthand for a whole bunch of changes that would save a lot of money. And let me tell you that they use that shorthand because otherwise you'd be listing off all of these things. I mean, it would be like if you talked about your household budget by saying to your spouse, if I said to Tina, we've got to reform our family budget. And she would say, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, it means that instead of going to the grocery store every week and spending $400, we'll spend $350. And it also means that we won't take long car trips anymore because we burn up a lot of gasoline or diesel. We burn both in our family. And you have to explain all that instead of just saying we want to change the family budget. It's just a shorthand. And one of the things, Grover, are you there? No, I think we lost him altogether. One of the things that they're proposing, the Republicans, is this. They're saying we would like to reform Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is insurance for people who are considered to be in poverty in America. Now, crazy as it is, America is one of the most prosperous countries on planet Earth. It is so blessed by God with so many resources and so many hardworking people and so much land and so much oil and natural gas and minerals and everything else. But we've managed to somehow turn ourselves into a country where 20% of the population is considered to be in poverty, despite the fact that they're surrounded by one of the most prosperous countries on earth. The Medicaid reform the Republicans want most, they want to be able to say, listen, we're going to require that if you're on Medicaid, insurance, health insurance for poor people, you have to either be looking for a job or in a part-time job. That's what work requirements mean. And if you say, so we're going to give them health insurance benefits that for a family of four might be worth well over $1,000 a month. And all they're asking is that you that you have a job, or that you're looking for a job, or that you're trying to find some kind of work so that you can provide for yourself. And oftentimes that part-time job that you get turns into a full-time job with full-time benefits and everything else that goes with it. The Democrats don't want to do it. Now, I'd love to have an naysayer tell me why it's not reasonable to say, if we're going to pay for your health insurance at that great cost, you should at least have a job. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I've got a question for you. Should a student be banned from school for wearing a shirt that declares there are only two genders? Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. We're going to get to your phone calls and emails in a moment. And, of course, naysayers are always welcome. Maybe there's a naysayer who insists, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, now on the Supreme Court, that if you're not a biologist, you can't define what a woman is, and you can't define human beings as being either male or female. I think it's kind of a stupid idea, but I'll get into the details of this because the family of this boy, he's in 7th grade, so he's about 12 or 13 years of age. Actually, he's 12. That he has been banned from school because he wore a shirt that says there are only two genders, a statement of fact. And how does a school say that? I understand that schools have the ability to say you can't wear distracting things to class. If you showed up in your clown shoes with one of those big fright wigs on top, that's actually the way Joe Biden should dress every single day. But if you showed up dressed like a clown, like the president, you could say that's distracting. But you show up wearing a T-shirt, not one that advertises guns or alcohol or illegal drugs or anything like that. You show up in a T-shirt that merely says there are only two genders and you get kicked out. I'll give you the details in a moment. 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, you go right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. A shout out to our friends in Midland, Texas, where they listen to great talk radio all day long on KCRS. That's AM 550. And of course, you can find my show there Monday through Friday as well. And what's coming up this hour? The federal COVID public health emergency finally, at long last, officially ended last week. But millions in the U.S. are still suffering from the repercussions should long COVID be our biggest focus right now. Has Joe Biden backed himself into a corner? Your tax dollars will be used to expand an oil refinery, not in America, but in Indonesia, which undercuts Joe's green agenda. But I guess if you do it somewhere else, it's kind of like the logic that says if you buy an electric car, even though it was made with a lot of pollution in China, that somehow you're helping save the earth from carbon dioxide pollution, as long as those minerals weren't dug out of the ground in America and the batteries were made in communist China, then it's okay. So I guess if Joe says, yeah, we'll take American tax dollars, expand an oil refinery in Indonesia, and somehow that's on the American taxpayer. And a great friend of the show, Buddy Brown, is joining me later on this hour to talk about his brand new hit on iTunes. And why isn't this thing trending on Spotify? Because Buddy Brown managed to come up against the woke police. We'll get him to tell the story as well. And of course, take a moment to cast a vote in our Twitter poll. The question today: should unvetted illegal aliens, many of them adult males, be housed within public elementary schools? And if you wonder where's that happening, New York City, 6 public elementary schools. So we're talking about kids from kindergarten age, about 5 years old, all the way up to about 12, 11 or 12, that they're going to use their gymnasiums to house the illegal aliens that New York City said, oh, we love Joe Biden's immigration policies. You elected a bunch of liberal nitwits as governor of your state, as mayor of your city, on your city council. And of course, based on the numbers, New York City voted big time for Joe Biden. Well, you bought it, you own it. And now all of a sudden the illegals are showing up and parents are saying, hey, you can't house these kids at the elementary school that my young child goes to. Well, I guess they are. I would say no. We should not have illegal aliens housed at elementary school, not in New York City, not in any American city. Find the question at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group. You should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Now, let me go back to that T-shirt for just a moment. The family of a 7th grade boy, according to the Daily Wire, is preparing to sue his Massachusetts middle school for banning him from wearing a shirt that says there are only 2 genders. The Morrison family plans to file a lawsuit against Nichols Middle School for violating their son. His name is Liam, like Liam Neeson, but Liam, violating his First Amendment rights. Because remember, a lot of people forget that public schools are government agencies. Now, I know people don't think of them that way. In fact, I got into an argument one day with a caller who said, Lars, we're talking about government, not public schools. I said public schools are government agencies. They are constrained by the First Amendment. Liam, 12 years old, said he was told to remove his 2-gender shirt almost immediately when he arrived at school. Now, that's shutting down his political free speech. Of course, a school can say, and they do, you can't wear a shirt that shows guns, even though I think you should be able to. Can't show a shirt that talks about illegal drugs. You can't show a shirt, let's say, that advocates for violence. I understand that. But the Middleborough Public Schools Superintendent, Carol Lyons, says that Liam violated the school dress code because, quote, the content of Liam's shirt targeted students of a protected class, namely in the area of gender identity. Well, hold on a second. Does that mean the trans kids didn't like it? Yes, of course it means the trans kids didn't like it. But what about the trans kids? How many genders are they? If you've said, I was born a boy, but now I'm a girl, that's one of 2 genders. Is there a 3rd gender that trans kids believe in? No. You're a boy who thinks he's a girl, or you're a girl who thinks he's a boy. That's still 2. I mean, I can count to 2. Liam came back to school wearing another shirt that read, there are censored genders, but school personnel told him, you got to take that shirt off as well. This is the craziness that our kids are up against. And the fact is, it's dead wrong when schools, government agencies start dictating free speech like that. It should not happen. I hope the family succeeds in its suit. Hey, are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000 and who couldn't? Employee retention tax credits are an incredible opportunity. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. They've already helped out 1,500 small business owners, and those owners got $300 million in funding, and they know what they're doing. They've got a team of CPAs who specialize in filing those credits, and they'll be with you every step of the way, even in the event of an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retained 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, and even if you already got that PPP money, the Paycheck Protection Program, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant, it's not a loan, it's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify for it. Go with a team you can trust at getmyfunds.com. That's 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. Coming up, we got to talk about a big long-term concern, and that is long COVID. We'll talk about it with our medical go-to guy, Dr. Henry Miller. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Tuesday. Consider this. When the pandemic hit, the world kind of shut down to a greater or lesser extent, depending on where you lived and who was in charge and calling the shots. They didn't much leave this to average citizens to make up their own mind. But now that we're back somewhat to normal, and catching COVID isn't as big a concern as it once was, should those with long COVID be the focus of medicine moving forward? Well, Dr. Henry Miller joins us now, medical doctor, molecular biologist, and at the American Council on Science and Health, founding director of the FDA's Office of Biotechnology. Dr. Miller, welcome back.
Thank you. Always good to be with you, Lars.
You kind of surprised me with one of the pieces you sent me because I read a lot of background, and it said that the number of people with long COVID that persists for a very long time is actually a smaller percentage of the people who get long COVID. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes. Some people do recover, often very.
How long? I mean, when we talk about the total number of the people who've had COVID, SARS-CoV-2, whatever you want to call it, COVID-19, that I guess we now know the Chinese apparently developed in a lab using our money in part. What percentage of the people who get COVID end up with the long form?
Well, one of the difficulties is that there's no common definition. There's no consistent definition. Some even in the U.S., let alone worldwide. So sometimes it's defined as the persistence of symptoms for more than 4 weeks after the initial infection.
Right.
For some, it's several months. But there's a subset of the onset of new conditions that the patient hasn't ever experienced, say 6 months between or a year even after the resolution of the initial infection. And that can be things like cardiac problems, valvular disease, pulmonary problems, kidney disease, and so on. Now, how do we know that that's related to the COVID infection?
You guessed my next question. Go for it, Doc.
Right. Well, it's much more common in people who have experienced an acute COVID infection than others. So it's presumptive, and that's one of the difficulties. Another that's related to that is that we frankly don't know what to do systematically because we don't know the physiology of how the virus causes these late onset or even the more proximal onset of long-term symptoms. It's very difficult it's like punching in the dark. So the point of my article was that we really need to study this more. And we owe it to the patients, and we owe it to the health of our healthcare system, for that matter.
Well, except that there's no commonality at all, because is it fair to say there are tens of thousands of cases of this or hundreds?
Well, it's estimated that the frequency is between 10 and 30% of people who are infected. Now,
right.
I think 30% is way, way high. But suppose we take 10% as the low estimate, and it's thought that there have been about 200 million people infected with SARS-CoV-2 at one time or another. How do we know that? We look at antibodies to parts of the virus that would not have been elicited by vaccines. So they would have been elicited by infection with the virus itself. So 10% of 200 million is 20 million.
That's a lot of people. And of those, how many are going to? Didn't you have something you kind of divided out, saying of those 20 million? Let's say it's 20 million, just for the sake of argument. It may be somewhere around that number. How many of those are going to have it 6 months, a year, or longer?
I would say at 6 months, most of that 20 million. Again, we don't have a common.
We'll still have it.
And
they'll still have it.
Yes, and then there are those who have the onset of new conditions like type 1 diabetes or a heart murmur or vasculitis or something like that. It's very difficult because we don't have a good diagnostic test the way we do for diabetes or for kidney disease. So we don't know exactly what we're dealing with. What we also have very sometimes that almost never occur, loss of taste and or smell, sometimes for long periods. That's very unusual with other viruses.
Did we just lose Henry Miller? Dusty, can you check on Dr. Miller and see if he's still on the line? It sounds like we lost his cell phone for just a moment there. Hey, Dr. Miller, we'll get back to you just as fast as we can. I don't know what happened just then, but in any case, he's been talking about long COVID. One of the things I'm curious, it's funny, we've got cell problem, and occasionally you say, well, get everybody on a landline. Well, okay, that'd be nice in this modern age, how many times do you talk to people and find them on a landline versus a cell phone? Because these days everybody has a cell phone, usually in their hip pocket, if not in their purse, depending on their gender. If we can talk about gender like that. Hey, Doc, are you back?
I'm back. I guess
we
I guess,
lost your cell phone for just a moment, but you were saying.
I guess another symptom is interruption of cell phone service.
Do you have long COVID?
I hope not, but maybe my phone does.
Let me ask you about something, and let me ask. There was a syndrome, and I remember doing a lot of stories on it decades ago called chronic fatigue syndrome, and you'd take people who are really, out there people, mountain climbers, and very vigorous people, and all of a sudden they'd get this thing. And a lot of people thought, well, I heard people, doctors even, say, yeah, we're not sure how much of this is psychosomatic, how much of it is real, how much of it is not. I don't even remember. I think they determined to some extent that there really is a real, problem with chronic fatigue syndrome. But is it somewhat that problem that you got very, very sick with COVID? And how do they determine whether you've got long COVID or you just don't feel like yourself anymore? I mean, if you can't define what it is, gee whiz, I think his cell phone dropped out again. What the heck? Well, you know what? So sometimes, folks, that's exactly the way the day goes. Dusty, see if you can find Dr. Miller. I don't know what's up with his cell phone, but there we are. Glad to have you with me. Let me remind you about our Twitter poll today. Should unvetted illegal aliens, many of whom are adult males, be housed within public elementary schools? And if you wonder where that's happening, it's actually happening already at 6 public elementary schools in New York City. Now, New York City has one of the biggest problems with illegal aliens because, of course, the Biden administration shipped so many of them to New York. You see, big cities like New York and Chicago, they only object to illegal aliens if a Republican governor like Abbott or DeSantis sends the illegal aliens to their city. When Joe is sending them to their city, then they're not allowed to object because that, of course, is exactly what the Democrats do. They ship illegal aliens wherever they want to go. And if Americans thought for 1 minute that you were going to get 9 million people coming into the country, and with about 40% or 50% of the population on the East Coast, that East Coast cities weren't going to get about half of those illegal aliens, and West Coast cities get most of the rest of them, and very few of them are going to end up staying in Texas and the southern states. Of course, that isn't the way it's going to work. And now that those cities, many of them blue Democrat cities, have started to set up they're yelling and screaming, saying, you can't send all these illegal aliens to us. This isn't our problem. Well, yes, an awful lot of us, while we don't think you should put illegal aliens in an elementary school that still has young kids in it, a lot of us say, you know what? You voted for this guy. You endorsed his policies. Now you get to take the consequences of those policies. In any case, glad to be with you. We'll get back and take a few of your phone calls up next at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to get to your phone calls and emails. For example, I've been talking about this illegal alien problem of New York City taking the gymnasiums away from elementary school age kids, and at least 6 schools so far, and saying, well, parents, you're just going to have to suck it up. Kids, you're not going to have recess or gymnasium time. And why is that? Because New York City is a liberal city. They voted for the policies of Joe Biden. Now they're getting the illegal aliens that Joe Biden is bringing in. And as the Post-Millennial reports, and that's our friends Andy Ngo, Ari Hoffman, and others, as New York City deals with a massive influx of illegal aliens, Mayor Eric Adams announced that he is asking a judge to revisit the city's sanctuary city law. The law of sanctuary city was in place long before I became mayor. I'm following the law. As a law enforcement person, we follow the law. We're now in court today asking the judge to revisit this law to deal with the humanitarian crisis, because when they decided to put that law in place, no one thought they'd be dealing with a humanitarian crisis of this proportion. The statement comes as hotels in upstate New York have canceled pre-booked hotel rooms and booted out homeless veterans to make space for Joe Biden's illegal aliens. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. All of these sanctuary cities said, oh, let's do the popular, politically correct thing. Let's invite illegal aliens to come here, because they were used to the way it was under, say, going back to George Herbert Walker Bush or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or George W. Bush, or especially under Donald Trump. The number of illegal aliens was still relatively small. Now that Joe Biden, who, by the way, a huge majority of New Yorkers and Manhattanites voted for, now that he's thrown the border wide open, because he did that on day one in office, he took actions that invited people to come to this country illegally. He changed the restrictions on entering. He changed everything he could get away with changing without passing an act of Congress. And guess what happened? Millions of illegal aliens have come. And if New York City and the East Coast of the United States is where about 50% of the entire U.S. population lives, where did you think the illegal aliens were going to go? And all of a sudden, New York City isn't so crazy about sanctuary status after all. I understand two reactions to that. Number one, it shouldn't be happening because it's hurting average people in those cities. But number two, they kind of deserve it in the sense that you voted for liberal policies. You voted for liberal politicians in Washington, D.C., liberal members of Congress who supported this nonsense, and they could turn it around anytime they want to. You supported a liberal president in the form of Joe Biden who invited this invasion of illegal aliens. And now all of a sudden, now that it's happening, the very thing that you wished for, now you're turning around and saying, hey, we don't want this happening anymore. Well, guess what? Communicate that to Joe Biden. He is, after all, running for re-election. If a big city like New York City, if the population of that town started calling the White House saying, I'm a Democrat, I voted for you last time, and I want you to knock this off, do you think that might have an effect? Can you imagine if 1,000 New Yorkers called every single day for about the next 50 days or 60 days and said, you keep doing this, the Democrats will never win in another election. If they got that, and if they publicize that, that's a way to shut it down. Now, you have to have the guts to actually say the Democrat policies on illegal aliens and the invasion of America are wrong. Let me tell you another thing that is wrong. Should your tax dollars be going toward expanding oil refineries? And don't answer yes too fast, because I'm not talking about oil refineries funded by expansion money in the United States. No, climate groups are now angry with Joe Biden, saying he violated his pledge, this is from commondreams.org, liberal site, to end public financing for international fossil fuel projects after the U.S. Import-Export Bank, they call it the Bank of Boeing because many times it finances the purchase of Boeing airlines. It works out very well for Boeing. Also works out well for poor countries that couldn't be able to get the kind of credit necessary to borrow the kind of money you have to be able to buy Boeing jetliners. But the the XM Bank is what they call it, that was approving a $99.7 million loan for an oil refinery in Indonesia. The XM's board of directors, chaired by Biden appointee Retta Jo Lewis, said the loan would support facility expansion, fuel efficiency, and safety upgrades at the Balikpapan refinery run by Pertamina, which is Indonesia's state-owned oil company. In other words, your tax dollars through the XM Bank are not just expanding an oil refinery and not benefiting America. They're not shipping gasoline and diesel all the way from Indonesia. We're actually supporting a socialist operation because Indonesia, the country, owns this oil company. Bloomberg reported last week that the XM financing is set to help bolster gasoline production by 101,000 barrels per day. The climate organizations that back Joe Biden and his fellow Democrats, they're not crazy about this idea. And they're not buying the bank's claims about the supposed benefits of funding the oil refinery expansion, a move that runs directly counter to Joe Biden's 2021 vow to end new financing for overseas fossil fuel projects. Fact is, Joe Biden lied to you. Get used to it. The rest of us got lied to. We're conservatives, and we said, yeah, Joe lies to us all the time. So if the liberals start to find out Joe is going to lie to you as well, maybe they'll just change their tune. Glad to have your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And Barbara writes in, Lars, one question I've never heard asked during the early days of the Trump-Russia collusion hoax was why would Russia prefer Donald Trump over Mrs. Clinton? As the Clintons were the only ones making deals with them, like Uranium One, wouldn't they see her as the preferred candidate? The notion that they would rig the election to help elect Donald Trump, who is unlikely to put up with Russia, only made sense to those with low IQs, signed Barbara. Well, Barbara, I can tell you this. I've made that argument till I'm blue in the face. I've asked people. During the Obama administration, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she went to Russia and she tried that stupid reset button thing. They wanted to reset their relationship with Russia. You remember that her boss, Barack Hussein Obama, infamously got caught on a hot mic saying, tell Comrade Vladimir that I'll have more flexibility after the 2012 election. The Obama administration and Hillary Clinton very much identified with the Russians. And as you point out, Hillary Clinton was the one who signed off on the Uranium One deal. They gave up about 20% of America's uranium capacity by selling Uranium One to a Russian-controlled company, which means that the Russians should have loved the idea of Hillary Clinton coming in. They should have actually feared the idea that Donald Trump would become the president of the United States, because that meant very bad news. I think that's the short answer to your question. But the long answer is the whole thing was a fraud to begin with. The Russia collusion hoax was invented by the Hillary Clinton campaign, bought and paid for by Hillary and the Democrat National Committee, and then pushed forward by the folks at the FBI and even the CIA, because they knew that they would try to defeat Donald Trump before he ever got a chance to run for office. That was an outrageous thing for them to do, and they got caught. And guess what? Even after the John Durham report, nobody's going to jail. Coming up, I love music, and I don't particularly like the political left. So when you put those two things together, you get my buddy, Buddy Brown. He's coming up next, and we'll talk about why his new album is in Spotify jail. That's next on The Lars Larson Show.
All my exes changed their sexes. She used to be a her, and now she's a he. But all my exes changed their sexes. Thank God we broke up back in '03.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. That is the great Buddy Brown, country music singer and songwriter. Of course, I love his political stuff and or cultural stuff even better. And Buddy Brown joins me now from Truck Sessions, his latest album, which is in jail. But we'll get to that in a minute. Buddy, welcome back.
Lars, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing very well. If I was doing well, I can't complain because nobody would listen anyway, except maybe my audience. But you're obviously doing very well with this new album called Truck Sessions, as long as you don't get blocked on Spotify. What happened there?
Yes, life is good. It's interesting. So I do, for all your listeners, politically incorrect country music, and we released a new country album called Truck Sessions. And I soon realized on Friday, when all the stores were supposed to debut and be available, I was in what I call Spotify jail, which is they didn't publish it. The interesting thing is Apple, who we give a hard time to, they published it, and it went crazy. So instead of being mad, we gave a charge to our fans, which is about 2 million and counting right now. And I said, look, y'all, the same people that went after Tucker Carlson, the same people that put dudes in women's sports and forcing Bud Light down our throats are trying to cancel me now. So I told them, let's send a message and get on there on iTunes. And it became the #1 country album in America, and it's still sitting there as we speak.
Wow. I mean, that's huge success, buddy. I mean, it's not just that you do great music, but the fact that you have great music with a fun message, which pokes fun at stuff that just absolutely invites to the poking fun. Because some of the stuff going on in the world right now is just nutty. It gives you new material every day, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, it almost makes it too easy, doesn't it? Yeah. It's definitely the fans. They're incredible, but I think it's also successful because we gave country fans something real and something hilarious. These songs would never, ever be approved by a committee in Nashville because they don't want to offend the bedwetting beta male, guys who can't even change a truck tire. So they stay away from it, but I can waltz right in there and say, hey, y'all, hold my beer, watch this.
Yeah, and that's the way to do it. But, buddy, I think there may be a sea change going on. You saw what happened with Bud Light and all that. Colossal disaster. Sales are still going down, smaller, but they lost about a quarter of their market share. And for any big company, that's massive. And now they're trying to figure out how to recover from it. Maybe Bud Light should hire you to write a song that makes fun of their Dylan Mulvaney experience.
You're absolutely right. And here's the bottom line, Lars, is I can say so many things that people in corporate America can't say, and I get all the time. I'm sure you do as well. I can't share this post or I can't say this, the stuff that you're saying, but I agree completely with it. If I shared that, I'd get fired. And everybody's looking out for their job. But the bottom line is conservatives can make an unbelievable change if they want to fight for it enough. And exactly what you said with Bud Light, if you want to fight for it, you got it. And you can push them back further so far that they won't ever dare come at the right again. I truly believe that.
I'm talking to Buddy Brown, country music singer and songwriter. We play your songs as what we call get-backs. They're getting back from the break. So when you come back from a commercial break, you'll hear one of your songs. And they're absolutely flat out fantastic because people hear them, they go, where is this guy? And I put the link up on the site and people get a chance to reach out to you directly. Are there any ideas that you get to and you just say, that one's a little too edgy?
Yeah, you got to definitely ride that line because with social media, one video that's over the line is one too many. That's, conservatives have to dot every I, cross every T. We got to do everything twice as clean as everybody else. So It's always in my head. But at the end of the day, you got to entertain. And I think everybody realizes that's what I'm doing. Don't hate anybody. I love Americans. I love America. Cheer everybody on, no matter who you are. But don't put up with nonsense at all. And I think that's the message.
Well, see, and that's the thing, buddy. I do the same thing. I've only been sued once for $50 million by a judge, and we won this. Well, he sued us for $50 million. He was losing all day long, kept appealing it, and finally the insurance company came to the TV station and said, hey, we can settle out for $3,400. It'll cost us more than that to walk into court one more time. So they said, I can't.
That's a trip to Disney World.
I know, and it's like I said, well, I can't very well tell you not to settle, but I sure wish we could have just said we flat out won. But $3,400, that's a rounding error for most lawyers. So where do you take this next? And you are touring now, aren't you?
Here and there, but you know what? Here's the deal. I'm reaching 600,000 to 800,000 people a night.
Yeah.
A night. And so when you look at these arenas and coliseums, the game has completely changed. Even if I was to fill an arena, what's that, 20,000 people? And I'm not, I don't mean at all to sound cocky. I would never, ever go there or do that. I'm just saying the internet age for conservatives of joining everybody and saying, this is a big family, because when you watch Buddy Brown videos on YouTube, it's like, coming home. It's one big family, an army of patriots, and it's gotten so big that we all just cheer each other on, and I feel like I can get a whole lot more done from this point of view than I could if I was touring, if that makes sense.
So, no, it does, because, buddy, look, I haven't gone to a lot of concerts in the last 20 years. Tina and I went to one or two, but the reason is I say, I get to see them in person. I'm sitting 100 yards away, well, maybe not 100 yards, 75 yards away from them in the seats, and I think, and most of the time you end up watching the performer on a screen, and you think, why am I not sitting in my living room in my running shorts with a beer in my hand or a whiskey in my hand, watching on a screen there. Why did I drag myself down to a physical arena? Well, because you saw him in person. From 75 yards away, that's not exactly in person to me. So I think you've made a smart choice, and really you reach out to a lot of people. Now, you know your friends on the Mississippi Super Talk Network are listening tonight, and they feel particularly about you because you're a hometown boy. You want to say anything to them before we sign off?
Absolutely. God bless my folks in Mississippi. Keep fighting the good fight. Y'all are what makes me proud to wake up every single morning and just represent a good old boy from the Deep South. So thank you so much.
Well, very good. And, buddy, we're going to recommend everybody get Truck Sessions. You will find it on all the popular places. Maybe Spotify will even keep it up there or not. It'll be, they can make a Bud Light kind of decision or they can do what's sensible. Buddy, it is always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Lars. Have a great night, buddy.
Thank you, sir. That is Buddy Brown, and you hear his music fairly frequently on this program. And, of course, his brand new album is called Truck Sessions, and we always appreciate his time. Glad to get your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com and tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. If you're wondering, because it is a common sense question, why in the world would a man so old and so feeble and so demented as Joe Biden run for re-election? And the fact is, it's easy to make the case that Joe Biden is running for re-election because he has no choice. And the thing that gives him no choice is a woman by the name of Kamala Harris, who is currently vice president and, if anything, is less popular even than the very unpopular Joe Biden. I thought I'd talk about that with one of my favorite Democrats, a lifelong friend, Josh Markey, who joins us now. Josh usually comes on to talk about legal issues. But, Josh, welcome back to the program. Does Joe Biden have any choice but to run for re-election, given that his clear successor could end up being Kamala Harris?
Well, I'll probably vote for Joe Biden again if he runs, and I think a lot of people will, but in part because I think Kamala Harris, who I knew not terribly well, but I did know her before she became a senator. She was a district attorney, and after that she was the Attorney General of California. She is a very ambitious woman, and there's nothing wrong with ambition in politics, but she makes people very, very uncomfortable, and particularly those who get to know her, which is worse.
Is she just ambitious? Because I have no problem with ambition either. I consider myself an ambitious person. But is she capable?
I don't know. I mean, she served as the district attorney. That's the one thing she probably did well because all the other DAs in San Francisco before her were so horrible. And then what she did is she started a pattern that she has done throughout her career of securing power, getting halfway through the next term, and then when she's running what in politics we call from a position of safety, meaning that whether she wins the next election or not, she still has a good job. She did that as district attorney. She won a paper-thin election to Attorney General of California against the Los Angeles County DA. And then from there, won a paper-thin election to the United States Senate.
Where she only served for 4 years and didn't accomplish much of anything, correct?
No, not really. In fact, I was stunned. As you have often, both taunted and said accurately, I'm a Democrat, and I watched the Democratic convention, and I was kind of horrified by the debates because I thought that Harris went way out of her lane to essentially accuse, Uncle Joe of being a racist. And if somebody had done that to me, I certainly wouldn't reward them by giving the number 2 seat on the ticket. And I'm not sure what she brought with it.
You know what I think she brought? And I want you to be honest. You're a Democrat. I'm a conservative and a Republican second. I consider myself a conservative first. She brought 2 things. She is female and she is black. She was hired for that reason by Joe Biden to be his running mate. Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
And at this point, when you say you don't know if she's capable or not, let's see. She's the border czar and has only gone near the border one single time, and that wasn't even at the border. There's a crisis at the border right now. By President Obama's definition, there's a crisis times 10 at the border right now because he said, or his Homeland Security Secretary guy, Jay Johnson, said anything north of 1,000 a day is a crisis. We're now at well over 10,000 per day. and that is a crisis times 10. And can you name a single thing that Kamala Harris has done about the border?
Well, I'm assuming, and I don't give her any great credit for it, I think it's almost funny, except it's sad, that she apparently got federal military troops to go to the border at the same time that Republican Governor Greg Abbott got Texas National Guard troops to go to the border. I frankly don't see what the difference is, and I'm not entirely sure why they're using National Guard. I mean, clearly our border policy overall has failed, and it's been failing for a long time. A lot of liberals, and I don't consider myself one of them, want to believe that America is literally an open door for anyone under any circumstances. And people who say that have clearly not traveled the world, because there is no country, not Scandinavia, not Great Britain, certainly not Canada, that just says, throw the doors open and bring me your huddled, your poor, your criminals, the people you don't want. I don't like the guy you support for President, Donald Trump, and I don't like a lot of the things he said, but he does have a tendency to say some things out loud that are sometimes true. And Mexico has deliberately it's what Fidel Castro did in 1981, the so-called Marielitos. He basically dumped his war songs.
Let me try 2 data points. Did Donald Trump reduce illegal crossings of the border to one of the lowest levels in American history?
I don't know if he did. I'll take your word.
I believe he did based on the numbers. Has Joe Biden taken the illegal crossings to a stratospheric level, 9 million at this point, not even 2.5 years in? 9 million people have illegally crossed in the last 2 years. And Joe and his Homeland Security guy, Mayorkas, all run around saying, there's no crisis at the border. We have the border under control. So when you have a president who brought it low and a president who's taken it high, I know you don't like Trump. The fact is, he did a good job.
Well, I've said this about Democrats, and, even the blind pig finds the truffle occasionally. The fact of the matter is American border policy is incredibly complex. A simple answer, which is no one will cross or welcome everybody, both of them are going to fail miserably. And we live in an increasingly international world, and we've got the Mexican government, a leftist populist, who is deliberately pushing people from places like Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, through Mexico, and deliberately into our laps, making it our problem.
Yeah, because guess what's going to happen? They're going to work here, they're going to end up with jobs, and they're going to send tens of billions of dollars back to Mexico. It's Mexico's second largest source of income is remittances, people illegally in America working at jobs illegally and then sending money back to Mexico and now other third world countries. So I guess let's get back to the question of where this election's going to go, because Joe Biden says he's going to run for re-election. I think the biggest reason he's running isn't necessarily Kamala Harris. I think it's because he understands that if they actually finish an investigation into his son, and they've got big chunks of it done already, and they already have the bank records to show that many of Hunter Biden's illicit deals had monies that flowed right back to Joe Biden. The minute he steps out of the White House, he is very indictable. Am I wrong?
Well, I don't know if he's indictable. I'm sure he should be worried about Hunter Biden. I actually knew his other son, the one that died of cancer. He was a prosecutor, and he was the attorney general. And like many families, you have, the son that achieves and makes the father proud, and then you got the other one.
The scumbag.
And the fact of the matter is that Biden would probably do anything. I don't think staying in office is going to immunize Hunter Biden from prosecution. I really don't believe the system protects that much. It does a little bit. Donald Trump saw that, but not entirely. I think he's running because the Democratic Party really doesn't have another choice. There's just nobody else that's even remotely ready for prime time yet.
You still call yourself a Democrat, Josh. What does that say about a party when they say we've got an empty bench when it comes to the number one job? You got the last 20 seconds.
Well, I don't know. The Democratic Party largely left me. There are issues about which I still stand with them, But, I'm not one of those people who say, oh, my party, right or wrong. I vote for what I think, and I think a lot of Oregonians, people in the United States do. I'm very concerned about how our country is becoming so incredibly and angrily divided. I think that is bad for everybody.
I think so, too. Hang on for just a second, Josh. Glad to have you with me. Glad to take your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. When we come back on the Radio Northwest Network, I'm going to talk to Josh about some issues in the Pacific Northwest because I want to know from him whether or not he thinks the current governor, having lied about significant corruption within Oregon government, is going to it actually merits her resignation from office. We'll get to that in just a moment. Glad to have you with me on the Radio Northwest Network, and glad to take your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show on the Radio Northwest Network, proudly serving the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho for the past 23 and a half years, and glad to stay with you. It's a beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest, and we're glad to be with you and glad to take your calls. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'll get back to your phone calls and emails in a moment. Artificial intelligence is something that holds great promise in many ways, but like most tools, whether it's a gun or a knife or, let's say, my favorite, a chainsaw, it is both great and useful. It can also be very, very dangerous if it is not handled properly. And Will Reinhart knows that. He's Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity. Will, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell me this, is artificial intelligence as deadly and potentially dangerous as some experts are claiming it? And does humanity need to be protected from its own invention?
I think there are potential downsides. I think there are real costs to some of these new technologies. But, at the same time, I think there's a lot of benefit. And so where we're at right now, and especially what's going on today with the in the Senate is I think everyone's trying to suss out what that's going to look like. They're trying to figure out where the costs are going to exist, but they're also trying to figure out where the benefits are going to exist.
So how do they do that? And I'll tell you one of my fears, Will, is that I do see the benefit to AI. I understand. And my favorite example, I think it was a published piece a couple of weeks ago where they said using AI. I've known a couple of people over the years who've been radiologists, and they take a look at somebody's CAT scan or their MRI or the radiograph, X-rays that have been taken of one kind or another, and they say, we're looking for signs that you may have cancer coming. The piece I saw said, with AI, the computer could spot changes that are so minute and so subtle that a human being, even a very good radiologist, is not going to spot them, but the computer could spot the patterns, and as we add more data, could spot the patterns so well, we might catch cancer, for example, a lot easier. That sounds fantastic. How do we end up controlling this technology so it's not used in a way that's bad for human beings, but we do get those uses at the same time, and we don't curb innovation?
I mean, I think that, for better or worse, there's already a lot of government regulation that already exists, and the things that ultimately are going to happen is that AI, as you said, is going to be integrated into various services, right? It's going to go into medical services, and it's going to go into, a lot of healthcare. It's going to go into content creation, and each one of those areas is highly regulated. And so the way I see it is that, there's a lot of potential downsides to these new technologies. And it's really a suite of technologies, right? It's a whole bunch of different technologies happening all at the same time. But I think that at the same time, there's also this intense regulatory system that exists, as you well know, that ensures that, if there truly are problems, things are going to be dealt with in courts. They're going to be dealt with by regulatory agencies like the FTC or the DOJ, the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice. So, there's a lot of downsides, but I think that personally, I think there's going to be a lot of action already happening anyway that's going to try to regulate these new technologies.
Well, I hope you're right about that. But for instance, Will, if you went back to sort of the advent of cell phones, I remember the first ones coming to the town where I lived in 1985. I never could have afforded the technology. I only got into it about 5 years later. And if you had said to people, hey, if you have these cell phones, they're going to be endlessly useful for lots of things. But they're also going to allow perverts to prey on your children without you even knowing about it. And you would have said, that's crazy. How could that happen? It's a phone. It's a wireless phone, but it's a phone. And yet today we know that there are perverts out there who try to prey on young kids because of messaging apps, because of the internet, because of other things, much of it tracing back to cell phones. He said, I never would have expected that this device could bring all these evils into my family. And that's the part I'm worried about. With AI, the scariest initial thing that we can imagine, there are probably a lot we can't, is the idea that I could take a sample of your voice from this interview. I could make it sound just like you. I could then cause it to call, say, your home and convince your wife, of something. Hey, Will just told you, hey, honey, it's Will. I need you to transfer $10,000 to Lars's bank account. And I'm reasonably sure that there will be crooks out there who will do that. So how do we get a handle on that, again, without curbing the innovation?
Yeah, that's what we're going to have to work through case by case. As you said, the DOJ does a lot of this work against, CSAM, which is all the child exploitation material. So there are cases that are brought by the federal government, by policing agencies, right, by the FBI. They're getting in on those sorts of cases. They use advanced technologies, and I think that in the future they're going to have to continue using those technologies to do the investigative work to figure out where these people and these individuals are unfortunately, spreading content. So that I think is a positive use of these new technologies. But, the broader thing that I see happening is that the government in all of its different facets is going to be regulating this new technology in a whole bunch of different ways. It's going to happen in consumer protection. It's going to happen in, the Department of Justice with CSAM. It's going to happen with automobiles and autonomous vehicles. All the things that we see, all of the innovation that we see that's happening is happening in different industries. And so it's going to get regulated, each one of those industries slightly differently, because it's an input to all of these new technologies and this new innovation. It's not the output. It's not the thing that we're looking for.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'm concerned about is this. Could we agree that government is pretty stupid about technology most of the time? They're kind of, and especially Congress, they're just clueless half the time. They'll say, I don't even know how my cell phone works. And yet even the high-tech companies that deal with this all the time, like Twitter and Facebook and all, we say to them, why can't you keep the kiddie porn off off of these platforms? And they say, well, we try as hard as we can. We can't. I mean, somehow before Musk bought Twitter, they were capable of silencing just about any conservative voice that you could name. But they said, but we're not capable of silencing, the exchange of child pornography and really evil stuff like that. Even the people in the business say, we don't know how to get it done. And so I have even less confidence that the regulators who work outside of the private industry and maybe aren't as current with things, that they're going to be able to write the rules to make it happen.
Yeah, and there's a slightly smaller concern I also have with this conversation, which is that, as I was watching the hearing today in the Senate, one of the big things that many of the panelists were talking about, which is, slightly, I think, really, really interesting. So what is, as you said, the government is bad in a lot of this. And I think the real big question that I'm trying to understand is, how is Congress potentially going to mess this up or make things better? And the big thing that was going on, at least in this hearing today, is a conversation over regulation. What should regulation look like, right? A lot of these things that you're mentioning, have been brought up or brought up during the hearing today. And to me, what I think is the most important part of all of this is that we don't overregulate this at the same time, right? We're kind of dancing around the fact that there are very serious problems that could come about if we take too strong of a hammer to all these AI technologies. While there are problems, we need to ensure that all of the people in Silicon Valley are disrupted. We need to make sure that the Googles and the Microsofts, are undercut by new entrants into the market that can kind of shift around the market and make things more competitive. So while at the same time we need to ensure that people are protected, I think the real big thing is to ensure that we don't overregulate in this and that we're not, taking a step too far in the way that we actually regulate AI technologies going forward.
I'm talking to Will Reinhardt from the Center for Growth and Opportunity. See, I've got the same concern. I think the government could screw up an ice cream sundae. without even trying. And I do worry that they'll say, well, if that's the potentially bad stuff, we'll just make rules saying nobody can do that. It'll do two things. One, you'll cut down on innovation. Two, you'll probably cut down on competition because the big companies will be able to handle it because they can handle regulation very well. They've got the infrastructure. The little guys, which is where you often find the innovation, they won't be able to handle it. And if there's a marketplace for the evil use of the technology, you can just about guarantee that the dark web is going to somehow supply it. Will, thanks for the time. That's Will Reinhardt from the Center for Growth and Opportunity. Back in a moment. We'll get to your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. If I were honest with you, and I try to be honest with you every single day, I don't think unions have any business representing any government workers, and especially when it comes to schools. And the reason is it is an incestuous relationship where the labor union represents hundreds of thousands, in some cases tens of thousands, but large numbers of public employees. And then they gather up gigantic amounts of money. Just do the math. Say 500,000 public workers times $1,000 a year is $500 million. And it takes very little of that, a smaller proportion of it, to run the union, and the rest of it they spend on politics. And as I know, the number's about 99% on Democrats, who then vote for more money for the union. It is insider trading at its worst. But then you've got Randy Weingarten, who is the head of the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, the largest teachers union in America, I believe, although Max will correct me if I'm wrong. Max Nelson is director of labor policy at the Freedom Foundation. Hey, Max, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Lars. Pleasure to be back.
So you've got Randy Weingarten heading up the AFT to represent all the teachers in America. Was she really a teacher?
So Randy Weingarten has extremely limited teaching experience. And just for a minor correction here at the outset.
Oh, I'm sorry.
AFT, oh, no worries. It's relevant to the point. AFT, American Federation of Teachers, is one of the two large teachers unions in the country, the other being the National Education Association, which is actually by far the larger of the two. Now, Weingarten has positioned herself, though, as the face of teachers and teachers unions in America, primarily due to her long tenure as a union officer, as head of the AFT. The NEA, the National Education Association, has term limits for its officers. And so the current president, Becky Pringle, has been in that role for about 2 years, I believe. She'll be replaced by somebody else, a few years from now, and they cycle through. Pringle is actually a career teacher. Weingarten at AFT faces no term limits under the AFT bylaws and constitution, and she's been in a union leadership role for over a quarter century. The last time she set foot in the classroom was back in 1997. And so she taught part-time in New York City public schools, 2 hours a day as a per diem substitute from 1991 to 94, and then served as a regularly appointed teacher from 94 to 97. My guess is she actually started out as a union employee, as a union attorney for the New York City affiliate of the AFT in the late 80s, and became very close with the president of that local affiliate at the time. And my sense is, reading between the lines here, is that the outgoing president of that local union wanted Weingarten to succeed her. But to do that, Weingarten had to roll up her sleeves a little bit and spend at least a little time in the classroom.
A couple of hours a day as a per diem teacher. Is that what it was? A couple of hours a day?
Correct, for the first 3 years there, while she's still on staff at the union at the time. So anyway, she put in a little bit of time in New York City public schools, took over the New York City affiliate in 97, and then took over the national AFT in 2008.
And so
she's an attorney by trade and a union officer more than anything else.
I'm talking to Max Nelson, who's director of labor policy at the Freedom Foundation. Why, you'd say, well, union's a private organization. Why does this bother anybody else? She is now credited with 11 and a half years of service, so-called, to the teachers' retirement system of New York City. She gets 11 and a half years of credit, having taught a couple of hours a day for 3 years. and she could get pension benefits on the basis of that?
That's exactly right, Lars. So the Freedom Foundation just put out a report today documenting this, and this is crazy stuff. You can't make it up. So as I mentioned a moment ago, she worked part-time in public schools for 3 years, full-time, I think, from what I can tell, for another 3 years. And as a public school teacher, she was paying, at least while she was working full-time, she was paying into the city-run, taxpayer-funded pension plan for New York City public school teachers. Now, from what I can calculate here, she would have accrued, based on her actual time worked as a teacher in New York City, she would have accrued a little over 4 years of service credit in the pension plan. Now, to become eligible for any benefits, to become vested in the plan, teachers have to work for 5 years, or they have to accrue 5 years of service credit. So she would have fallen short of vesting in the pension plan based solely on her classroom teaching experience. However, there's a provision in the union contract with the city that allows teachers to be placed on union leave if they're elected to serve as union officers.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened when Weingarten was elected the head of UFT in 1997. And she's been on union leave. We verified this as part of our research. To this day, she's listed in the New York City public school system as an employee on union leave. And so documents that we obtained then from the retirement plan showed that she's been credited with 15 and a half years of service credit in the pension system, despite actually only working for 4 of those years. And so essentially what happened was the city retirement plan was counting her time as a full-time union officer, not working in the classroom, but head of the United Federation of Teachers in New York, was counting her time as the head of that union as though she was accruing service credit, just like a teacher working every day in and out in the classroom. And absent that counting toward her service credit, she wouldn't have been eligible for pension benefits at all.
So in other words,
as it is,
yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so she, as the top negotiator or the person who's head of the union, gets to benefit from the contract that she leads in negotiating.
Yes, correct. So whenever she decides to retire, she could retire now and be eligible for full pension benefits. She's 65. Let's say she retires 5 years from now at age 70, draws pension benefits for 15 years. Average life expectancy for a female in New York is about 85. So just very conservatively, if she draws pension benefits for 15 years after retiring at age 70, that would cost taxpayers well over $200,000, not taking into account cost of living adjustments that the pension plan provides, not taking into account a couple other factors. But for the pension plan counting her time out of the classroom as a union president, she wouldn't have been eligible for anything at all. But because of the sweetheart deal in the union contract, she could ultimately cost taxpayers several $100,000 in pension.
And let me ask you this, Max: is the New York teachers' pension well funded? Because I'm used to finding that almost every public pension in America is upside down. In some cases, literally hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, I don't know that very many pension systems could be described. Public pension systems could be described as well funded. I couldn't give you off the top of my head a rundown on the status in New York. But it's certainly concerning from a taxpayer standpoint. Just to illustrate a little bit how crazy this is, when a New York City teacher is working full time, they have to pay a certain percentage of their salary into the pension plan. No, it's
right.
A lot less than what the city has to pick up, what taxpayers have to pick up. But just based on the numbers that we have and her teaching record as we've been able to document it, Weingarten would have paid about $7,000 in wages based on the 6 years that she was employed part-time and then full-time.
Wow. 7,000 in, 200,000 out. That's Max Nelson, the Director of Labor Policy at the Freedom Foundation. Max, I appreciate you coming on. Back in a moment, we'll get to your calls. We'll talk about Joe Biden and what he says is the biggest threat in America, and you might be surprised by it. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get to your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Joe Biden is going to force individual Americans, and in many cases, Americans who really are not the best situated people to bear this burden. He's going to force the burden of illegal aliens on average Americans. And I'm going to give you a specific example that's going on right now. But first, I want to invite you to join the conversation. If you'd like to take part in what we call the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Now, you might say, Lars, you have spent a huge amount of time over the last 25 years talking about the problem of illegal aliens. I've highlighted the problem of crime because too many illegal aliens disproportionately are involved in criminal activity. Donald Trump was exactly right in 2015 when he said when they send people across that border illegally, they do not send their best. In fact, there are numbers that show that illegal aliens, while they are a small part of the overall U.S. population, they commit a disproportionate number of murders, of rapes, of assaults, of theft, of driving under the influence. And the numbers are right there. Now, most of the mainstream media doesn't want to take a look at that. And most of the government has said, we don't even want to collect the numbers, and we certainly don't want to leave them out, which is why these days, especially in sanctuary states, most of those sanctuary states and blue cities and blue states, they don't even want to identify people who are sitting in jail about whether or not they're on an immigration hold or not, because they know that many of us for a decade or two would say, well, if you've got a jail population that's representative of the state or the county that you're in, it should have about this percentage of people there who are illegal aliens accused of murder, rape, robbery, assault, and things like that. Turns out the illegal aliens make up a larger percentage than they do in the population. So, having said that, here's what's going to happen. The burden of the 9 million plus illegal aliens who have crossed into America in just the last 2.5 years is starting to fall on Americans. And let me give you two examples, one from New York City and one from California. And I'm willing to bet that these same kinds of things are playing out everywhere in this country. They just tend to be accentuated in high population states like New York and like California. So, for example, 6 public elementary schools in New York City are going to take their gymnasiums, kids are still in school at this point in the year, and they are going to use them to temporarily house illegal aliens who have flooded into the city. You say, hold on a second. That means the schools, at elementary schools in particular, where kids, even if the weather is lousy, whether it's too hot or too cold in New York this time of year, it tends to be kind of hot, then you say, well, the kids are going to go down and they're going to have gym class. And you say, nope. There are 6 schools in Brooklyn that are going to be used to house adult illegal aliens. And they say 5 more schools are already being prepared for that same kind of load. The 2 schools put cots in the gymnasium yesterday in preparation to host busloads of illegal aliens as soon as today. Now, parents said the school will be locked down with no recess and no physical education because the gym is adjacent to the outdoor playground. Now, this ought to be an outrage for parents, for taxpayers, whether you've got kids in school or not. If you say, we provide those public schools so that kids can go to school of an appropriate age. And in fact, take note of this. Damaris Fernandez, who is a parent of students at MS 577 and PS Public School 17, said, when you're a parent and you go to the school on legitimate business involving your child, you have to sign in and provide picture ID when you go into the school. And she said, now there are migrants in the playground. Now, do you know what that means? It's a problem I've complained about for a long time. Illegal aliens often have, in America, superior rights to the rights enjoyed by citizens. And if you say, well, Lars, how could that be? Well, here's a good example that if you are at a school and you're an adult and you show up on legitimate business to see your child, to visit a teacher, whatever it is that you're planning to do, you have to present picture ID and you have to sign in. Now you got a bunch of illegal aliens, and largely unscreened illegal aliens. When the Border Patrol writes them a ticket, they use whatever name the illegal alien gives them. Most of the people who are coming in, depending on where they're coming from, have thrown away their actual picture ID. In fact, I've talked to some of the people who go down to the border, and they're part of groups that don't like this stuff, and they look around and they find piles of picture ID. In fact, yesterday I mentioned I've got a piece of Cuban currency, and I asked the man who found it, I said, did you find a lot of this? He says it's all over the place. Because many times, if people are coming in from a country that's not favored, like Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, they don't want to be identified as Cuban. And so they want a Cuban currency on them. Also, they can't really spend the Cuban currency in the United States, so they just throw it away in the desert. They throw away driver's licenses. They throw away their matricula consular, which is their consular card. And why do they do that? Because they don't want to be identified. Now, if you wonder why somebody wouldn't want to be identified, because if you can identify somebody with picture ID, you can call the authority, seek the information from foreign countries. Is this person a good person? Are they a convicted criminal? Are they an accused criminal? Do they have a rap sheet? And if they throw away the ID, they take on a new identity. So they show up in New York City by the busload. Local authorities have no way of knowing who these people are, or what they're about, or whether or not they have criminal records. So when you have parents who are being told, when you come to see your child, you have to identify yourself, show picture ID, and sign in. But if you're an illegal alien, we're going to allow you to live inside the school where elementary age kids up to about age 11 or 12 are going to school because you, as an illegal alien, have superior rights. Another example of that is Joe Biden has been providing taxpayer-funded chartered airplane flights and oftentimes putting illegals on commercial airplane flights. Well, as you know, you show up at the airport, they say, where's your picture ID? You don't have picture ID, you're not getting on the plane. But the illegal alien shows up and says, well, I told the Border Patrol my name was Jose Ramirez, even though it might not have been. Here's the ticket they wrote me. That gets them on the plane. You have what amounts to illegal aliens who are super citizens in the United States. They have more rights than actual American citizens. And if anybody thinks that's a healthy situation, I'd be glad to take your call at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network.